Welcome to the podcast, Greg. I have been looking forward to this. I think it's going to be such a special opportunity to dive in with you.
Thank you so much, Leah. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited, honestly.
Yeah, the timing all feels like very meant to be. We worked together like 2 years ago. I should have looked it
Yeah,
up
I think
before.
it was about 2 years ago. Yeah, it was when my son was not one yet, and I remember that because it was a perfect timing with my son being born and like seeing the intuitive eating within him, and like yeah, it's pretty cool timing.
Oh, and he's 3 now, or he turns 3 in the summer, right?
He turns three August 3rd.
Okay, cool. So yeah, like 2 years ago. And your story has so many interesting layers to it. So, to start off, Greg, if you can just tell us about your story with your relationship with food and body, which I realize is a totally loaded question, but it's something that I really value. Hearing people's stories was really healing for me on my own journey. And I know that the listeners love that too. So, you can take it away and share with us your story with your relationship with food and body as much as you're comfortable getting into.
I would like to start relatively from the beginning. So I grew up in Connecticut, kind of like a small farm town in Connecticut by New Haven, Connecticut. Two very loving parents, mother, father. My dad was a my dad was a Wonder Bread delivery man, so like kind of in the food industry. My mom had a few jobs. Her main job was being a waitress at my uncle's restaurant. So I was kind of always around food. Like I grew up being a dishwasher at my uncle's restaurant. It was great. I mean, like I got to watch him like flip eggs and like have a blast. So, being around food was really cool. With that being said, I was very, very picky growing up. I barely ate anything. If a restaurant didn't have chicken tenders, I wasn't going. I mean, like not at all. And my mom, to the point where my mom actually went to the pediatrician and asked like if it was okay that I was only eating chicken tenders and like pizza. And he was like, yeah, it has like all the nutrients that a kid needs to grow. So it's like it's fine. So my mom like kind of was just like, okay, sigh of relief. So yeah, I didn't really grow up within diet culture whatsoever, which was really nice. Like I was allowed to have kind of anything. I was allowed to have like, gummy bears, sweets, snacks, actual like white Wonder Bread. My dad would literally like pull up the Wonder Bread and just like unload it at our house. He would like bring it to little league games. Like everybody loved it. So then fast forward to college. I went to college up in New Hampshire at Keene State College. Got introduced to the dining commons and alcohol and all of that. So like it was a big shift in my view of kind of the world when it comes to food. So I would just go into the dining commons and fill my plate with like anything and everything. So I was kind of like becoming an intuitive eater without knowing it, but then also like in college, kind of worrying about how I looked at the same time and trying to like work it off to make sure I didn't gain the freshman 15, etc. And then, I graduated college and I went to school for film, a minor in communication. So basically just a gen ed degree. Moved to New York City in hopes to become like a model slash, commercial actor. I didn't want to go like full on acting. I basically wanted to get by on, hopefully my looks or whatever. And I I literally went to New York City, got there with like $700 in my pocket. The first year I lived there, I moved 9 different times. I didn't know what I was doing, but I ended up meeting somebody who introduced me to this agency, and I ended up getting into the agency and going out for castings. And that was like it was such a culture shock and such a just a shock in general, seeing like all these different people. And I was going out to castings with these modeling castings with other, you know, teenagers essentially that they didn't go to college, or they're like trying modeling before they go to college kind of thing, and they're all like toothpicks. I mean, like I'm a bigger guy, like I'm Italian American, like bigger guy. I played sports growing up. I love baseball, so like big broad shoulders. Like I come from a family with like tree trunk legs, like straight up. It was I always remember that. Anyways, I would go and I would just be like, I need to look like this person to make this casting. I would research. I'm like, who booked this casting? I need to look like this. And I essentially just started starving myself. I was obsessed with the paleo diet. And that
Mm.
comes in different forms it has all different names now, like keto, paleo, Atkins. Like I realize that now, but I was obsessed specifically with paleo. Like that really clicked with me back then because I was very, I was I was 20 years old or 21 years old, but I was still very impressionable based on like, just how people looked at me. Being in the modeling world, you would only get booked on a job if you looked a certain way. Like there's no other reason. I guess if you're very personable, you can kind of like sway the casting directors, but like in the end, they're looking for a specific type. Anyways, I was obsessed with paleo. I started only eating like eggs and chicken with no salt, and like if I ate anything that wasn't paleo, and the rules of paleo are so ingrained in my memory now. Like you can have nuts and seeds, but you can't have legumes. It's absurd. Like you can have like almonds, but you can't have peanuts. So I'd like walk around the street and like eat my almonds, and like if I saw someone eating peanuts, I'd be like they're eating I'm like they're eating so unhealthy. Like what are they doing? And it's just like looking back on it, it's insane.
Yeah.
So I was kind of entrenched in that diet culture. Essentially, I would go into the agency, and my booker would be like, your face looks a little round. Like, did you go out last night? Did you like he would equate it to like going out or like having like either drinking alcohol or like eating a cheeseburger. What it was that I was leaving my apartment. I would go on the treadmill for like 2 hours, and I would be like so puffy and like just exhausted, and I wouldn't eat. So I'd go to the casting and or go to the agency and try to like say hi to everybody, and they'd be like, "Why are you so red?" Like blah blah. I'm just like, "Oh, I don't know. It's just hot out." But in the back of my head, I'm like, "I'm totally lying. I'm just like trying to, please you." So I was in deep. I booked a couple modeling jobs. I booked like Abercrombie, and it just like was not my vibe. I was not like it just wasn't for me, the whole industry. So I kind of got out of it. I got into another industry that was essentially based on how you look. It was like a cater waitering type thing. And again, I would just be next to people that were like very skinny, very tall, like completely different people. Nothing, not with my genetic background whatsoever. That were like tall, skinny, very lean, like, and I would just look at them and be like, "Well, how can I get like that?" I was obsessed with this one guy, and he was so lean, and he was like lean and muscular, and I was just like obsessed with his body. It sounds insane to say, but I asked him what like it was an early morning job, and I asked him like, do you have sugar in your coffee? We were like getting coffee. I was like, what do you put in your coffee? And he was like, milk and sugar. And I was like, what? I was like mind blown. I was like, you said the S word, and
Mm,
I didn't say that at the time, but I was just like, well, it's just mind blown. And that essentially is like, yeah, this guy has a completely different like he
right.
could whatever. Like it's not important.
That's
Um,
almost like that, almost carrying that back. It's like a crack in your like philosophy of like sugar equals skinny. Like it's almost like a really early hint of like he just eats what he likes and looks like this because of other things.
right. Yeah, he kind of like was slowly cracking the code. Like he was getting me out of he was like showing me the Matrix without showing me. It was
Yeah.
like the first scene of the movie. And then yeah, so after that we I met my wife about a year into living in the city, my now wife, Rebecca, and she was also in the modeling world. But also we were kind of getting out of it at the same time. And we were going out to eat all the time, naturally as like a new relationship would. And I always kind of I always wanted to start a food, like any sort of blog, not necessarily a food blog, which it turned into, but any sort of blog. And we were going out to eat all the time. So I started posting on Instagram. And back then it was just photos. And we started to gain a little bit of traction. And, you know, fast forward now, and it's pretty insane what our food blog has turned into. It's called Devour Power, and we have millions of followers on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, like all the platforms. And it all started. I think it kind of started as a quote unquote fu to the diet world, and I truly believe that. And I don't know if it was the same with Rebecca, my wife, but like I think like part of it is because I mean our blog from the get-go, it was just like over the top, like the like four patties on a burger, like crazy stuff that like I still wasn't eating. You know what I mean? Like I was
Mhm.
still trapped in this like weird culture where like my value is only determined by how I look. Like that's what I thought. And I was like, I'm only gonna get work now that like my face is on the internet. I'm only gonna be getting paid and be successful and get money if I look a certain way, if I look lean, and that's the only way people are gonna want to subscribe or they want, you know, they want to see somebody skinny when they want to see a skinny chef. That's what I thought in my mind.
Mm.
That couldn't be
So
further from the truth. It's just like it's insane. It's
yeah.
insane to me.
So Devour Power starts and you're posting like rich, decadent foods, like the cheesy, the double patty, triple burgers, the decadent food and the food that diet culture deems bad, all of the non-paleo, quote unquote, off limits things. And so
Oh
you're
yeah.
posting those things in the beginning, but are like what's going on? Like the internet sees you're posting it, what's going on inside your head in terms of like how you're relating to that food?
That's an interesting question, and I I was posting it. We were posting it specifically to get engagement. I mean, we were. I remember specifically like ordering burgers at like a burger place that's supposed to be really good, getting two of them so I can have two chances of getting like the perfect photo for it, and then like taking a picture and then throwing it in the trash. And I'm not proud of this. And
Yeah.
like, you know, if there was a, you know, a homeless person nearby, I would put it, I would, you know, ask them if they wanted it. But like a lot of times I would just not eat it and just throw it in the trash and then like keep like refreshing my Instagram to see how many freaking likes it got. It was
Yeah.
brutal. And this went on and off and for the most part on for like probably like 3 or 4 years from the inception of our blog Devour Power to like, you know, probably 6 years ago at least,
Yeah.
which is pretty wild. And then I start, you know, as I got older, I started slowly like getting out of it and being able to kind of, you know, at least try different things, at least not like, you know, but within that I'd be like, oh, I'm going to do paleo 5 days a week. And then 2 days I will treat myself. But like when I would treat myself, quote unquote, which meant like having half of a cheeseburger, I would go and run like, you know, 5 miles to
Right.
like offset it. And I would be, you know, exhausted. And for the first, you know, uh, probably 6 to 8 years of doing Devour Power, I got horrible migraines just
Mm.
from under eating. I would get migraines my entire life. You know, well, not my entire life, but like after college until like probably 8 years into the blog and being in New York City, I just get super bad migraines, and I could, you know, equate it now to a heavy part of it being just starving myself, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to pause with this part of your story, do you remember in the intuitive eating book or in any of the content? I know you've immersed yourself in the anti-diet world. Do you remember learning about the Minnesota starvation study?
If you start talking about it, then
Yeah.
I
So
probably
I think of it so much with your story to jog your memory and also for someone listening who's like, what is that? It was this study during World War II. There was a group of like men who were conscientious
I
objectors,
remember.
and then they were doing experiments to see how the human body responds to starvation. So they put these men on a semi-starvation diet, not even like full-on starvation, but like what would mirror a calorie restricted diet in our, you know, modern diet culture. And one of they observed like the differences, like changes physiologically, psychologically, and one of the really interesting responses that the men had was these were people who previously like weren't particularly foodies or interested in food, but once they were on this semi-starvation diet, they were observed to be like fantasizing about food, collecting recipes, like talking to each other nonstop. And so when you say like, yeah, it feels like starting Devour Power was a response, like an FU was a response to, you know, the restriction from the modeling days, it really makes sense in terms of like, yeah, a natural response is being like super interested in like the decadent rich foods that were previously restricted when you know when you go through those longer periods of starvation or restriction.
Absolutely. I remember, I mean, I would obsess about food and not even necessarily the obsession over eating it because I wouldn't really treat myself to it, but I would obsess over how how the food looked, like it how it looked and how it could photograph. I was obsessed with it, and it was it was crazy because I like one. I remember specifically one of my friends caught me like on my phone, and I was like looking through like Instagram, and I was just looking at it was like hashtag burgers, and I was just looking through burgers, and he was like, "You like really love burgers, huh?" And it was just like a regular question, and I was just like, "Yeah, I guess I do." But in the back of my head, I'm like, I don't love burgers. I mean, I do like burgers, but I don't like. I don't obsess about them. I'm obsessing about looking at it and like the idea of not obsessing about it. You know what I mean? I'm
Yeah.
obsessed about the idea of not obsessing about it. And like
Yeah.
if that could ever be attainable, looking back on it now. Yeah.
Right. And the phenomenon of like something that's off limits of like you're not allowed to eat it, so but you can look at it and photograph it and do all these other things.
Right.
So
Right.
take us from, okay, it's the beginning years of Devour Power. There's this like kind of internal battle of like I love taking pictures of the food and food blogging, but like inside there's a lot of hangups about the food. What happens from that piece? Like take us from that piece to today, to through the rest of kind of the journey.
So it was around that time that like the blog started taking off. We started like Rebecca and I started traveling a good amount. Then I started to eat a little more. Again, not that much. It was, like I said, I was obsessed with like running and just exercise in general and like counting, counting calories essentially. Not rigidly yet, but I was. And I would just have one bite, two bites, and then like think about it all day. Think about the fact that I like had that bread, that non-paleo stuff that was like still ingrained in my memory. And then, yeah, I don't really know what happened, but I knew something had to change. Like I knew I knew I loved what I did. I knew I loved my business. I mean, the business was taking off. We had, at that time, I think like two or three full-time employees, not including myself and Rebecca. Like there were people's lives on the line of me, like trying to, uh, heal my relationship with food and within that heal my relationship with like going to shoots for our clients. And that's when I found intuitive eating. I mean, I found it on, I think it was either TikTok or Instagram. I just found something about it and I did some research. And I think like I it was like a year-long process of being like, oh, should I do it? Like, I don't know. I was toying around with the idea of if it was, I couldn't get past that like paleo was the way to be. I mean, it just made sense to me looking back on it. Like that's what I thought. I was like, paleo means, it's eating stuff from the earth. Like, isn't that what we're supposed to do? And I was obsessed with that, and I was afraid to to break that,
Yeah.
to break that obsession because it was home for me. Like that obsession with paleo and that obsession with like restriction and essentially starvation got me to where I was at that point. Albeit it was extremely unhealthy, but it got me to the point of our business, taking off and having our employees be employed by us and like all this stuff. I was afraid that like if I dove into intuitive eating and started to heal my relationship with food, whatever that meant, that I would like not care about this job anymore. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because I knew like psychologically it was such a big part of my like therapeutic like way through my life. And then I started talking. Then we got in touch and we started talking about like really what it is and what intuitive eating, the concepts and I don't know how else to say it except for like it changed my life.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you say, Greg, like because I didn't realize that part of the fear, people have all kinds of fears going into this work, but your story is so unique in that like the fear of will this change my passion for taking pictures of food, like obsessing over the perfect picture of a cheeseburger if I'm no longer obsessed with food from the place of restricting.
There's also another fear, and that was gaining weight, um, not being quote unquote lean anymore, um, and it's crazy to think back on it now, not to like sidetrack, but I talked to my wife about like lean versus bigger or whatever, and she's like, I think you're more attractive now. Like I love you more now than I did before. Not that she didn't do before, but like she knows that I am happier. Like I'm not only eating more intuitively, but I'm living more intuitively, and I'm like it's kind of like gotten into, you know, my relationship with her and the business and my amazing son and like all this stuff. But yeah, I kind of sidetracked there. What
No,
was
that's
the
okay. That's such a
original question?
that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. And I love that
Mhm.
Rebecca says that. I think of with Al sometimes, like when he wants to share something like more emotional and he's like, I feel bad, like you shouldn't have to be the one picking me up. I'm like, no, it's literally more attractive to me for you to be open and vulnerable than to like act like a tough guy all the time. So just funny how like people get ideas in their head of like what's like more attractive, but like when it comes down to it, it could sometimes be something like totally opposite or different to your partner.
For sure. I think the biggest step that I did, and this came after we worked together, is I mean it came like 6 months to like probably 6 months after we worked together. I finally threw away my scale. Like I
Mm,
finally threw away the scale. For me, I don't know if it'll ever be like 100%. I'm an intuitive eater. I think that like I will constantly be working at it,
yeah.
constantly be reading, constantly be listening to podcasts, your podcasts, audiobooks, like stuff like that.
Mhm.
So
No
yeah.
one is ever 100% healed from it. Like it's that's unrealistic. There's no such thing. Like that's like, there's no perfect. There's no I'm a perfect intuitive eater. Like I always say,
Right.
you'll never unknow like the macros of certain things or what's paleo and what's not. Like that lives in your brain forever. But the image I like to give is it's like those files, like I think of the brain as like a big filing cabinet system, and like the file that says like what's on paleo and what's not. The hope is that, and this is I've already seen this with you, like that file just gets like dustier and dustier and like pushed in the back of the cabinet because you're not like accessing it. And then other files of
Hmm.
like, oh, am I hungry? Am I full? Is this satisfying? How does my body feel? Like those are the ones that you're like pulling daily.
Yeah, for sure. And I totally feel that. I kind of left out a certain part. It was before I reached out to you. I For about a year or so, I got really, really into the idea that I was going to like gain muscle and like get into like, essentially the like bro. I got into like the bro culture, doing a certain amount of days per week of a specific workout, a certain amount of rest days, and like you eat more on this day as opposed to this day. Like it was very rigid, and I had my fitness pal. Thankfully, it's not on my phone anymore. I had my fitness pal. I was doing like a certain amount of macros, like based on somebody who told me this. And the person that told me it, like, I'm still like extremely good friends with him. Like, he's one of my very good friends. It works for him. I don't know if it seems to be working for him. I'm not judging whatsoever. I just know for me, I have such an all or nothing personality. I was so obsessed with hitting that perfect 40, 30, 30, whatever the hell it was, of like the macros within the calories, but not too much so it stays green.
Mhm.
Um, and then like I became obsessed with like the micros of it, like the sodium levels and like all this. I was just like wanting to I wanted to be the best account on that app, on that my fitness. It was insanity. Like I wanted
Yeah,
to be like perfect.
I
And then
remember
like
you saying,
I would get headaches and like all this stuff. Yeah.
yeah, I remember you saying that you downloaded and deleted MyFitnessPal like hundreds of times before you reached out. Yeah, and I think a lot of people can resonate with that experience because something inside you is like, oh God, this is so wrong. Like to be like relating to food in this way, but also like it's compelling because there's like a way to get perfect and to get a gold star that like you did good today. So
Yeah, there was a lot of shame mixed in with that app and my lifestyle at that point. It was very much, I'm going to be rigid for like 3 days or as much as I, could essentially do this. And then I would be like, screw it,
yeah,
delete the app, be like, oh, this is, that feeling when like you're, you give up a diet, you're like elated, you're like, oh, this is amazing. And then like a few days go by and you're like, oh, well, I got to counteract that. So I would like re-download the app and I do it. Like it was just a well-oiled machine of not eating.
yeah. So
So
not
yeah,
actually very well
that's
oiled at all.
no, not at all. No, no, terribly oiled.
So
Yeah.
when you first learned about intuitive eating, you said you think it was on TikTok?
Yes, it was. I don't remember specifically who, but it was somebody that mentioned it,
Yeah.
and and I was just like, I was like, what? Like the idea that no food is off limits. And the idea that I could have a healthy relationship with food, the idea that I could not obsess about it and think about it all the time, it was so far out of my reach. And I was so entrenched in this just like paleo macro counting, like it was all just building up so much. And it was just it was just taking up so much space inside my mind, is what it was. And it got to the point where like I wouldn't go out to eat. I would specifically like stay home, just so I could like count the macros of the stuff. And I would only eat like I would eat like protein bars just so I could like scan the code, so I knew exactly like because I didn't want to weigh it because weighing it would like put it too much out in the open. Then like people might see me weighing stuff, and then judge. So it was just like a quick like scan of a protein bar, like that's harmless, right? It's insane. It was just like it was just yeah. There was a lot of shame mixed in there. Is what it was.
Yeah. So you hear about intuitive eating. It sounds like your initial reaction was some relief of like, wait, or like almost curiosity of like, is this possible? What happens from there? Like, how do you get to the that initial intrigued place to reaching out, going on the intuitive eating directory? What was that kind of grappling with this brand new framework like?
I mean, it was tough at first. I remember like finding you on the intuitive eating map. Like there was a whole map, and I wanted somebody like local, and you living in Brooklyn at the time. I think I just hit like, and it came up like yeah, and I just reached out. I mean, it was random, but I think it was a perfect fit. In retrospect, like looking back, and yeah, I think I remember our first call, and I just kind of unleashed everything about like my life and how I feel like I'm like restricting and just obsessing about food. And you were like, this is going to help you so much. And I was like extremely locked in after that. And I really like the fact that intuitive eating has a lot of science backed into it. When I first saw the first TikTok, I was just like, okay, is this just kind of like just kind of culty, like whatever kind of stuff? And then you introduced me to the intuitive eating workbook and all that, and just all the science behind it. I've listened to all the podcasts by the two women who started it, and like all these articles, and it's just pretty cool how much science is back behind it. Like I remember specifically there was this one podcast, and the guy was like, "What about like white bread though? I mean, like, isn't that we can all agree that like that's like bread that's bad, right?" And one of the ladies who started it was like, "It's just white bread, man. Like people in France have been eating it for like their entire lives, like since the dawn of and it's just putting it like that in its layman's terms is just it's such a warm feeling, like oh, it's like your mother hugging you kind of thing. Like it's gonna be fine. Like you're gonna be okay,
Yeah.
kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And I became obsessed with seeing it out in public and like rejecting it and rejecting it and rejecting it, and then like writing down how I would see it in public. And then I just became obsessed with doing the work of your work, the intuitive eating work.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the science was really helpful for you, which is a common
Yes.
response. People are like, there's all this science to support diets. Like, I want to see evidence and science to support intuitive eating, which as it's becoming more of, there's been more time that intuitive eating has become like a solidified framework, more and more science and evidence has come out. How did you navigate the beginning stages of like wanting to dive all in with intuitive eating, but also having the voices of diet culture still so kind of close in your recent past?
My son helped me a lot with that. I think, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, like the timing couldn't have been better for me. I think if I reached out like 2 years before, I think I don't think I would have signed up. I don't know if I was ready for it. I was still just very obsessed with being, quote unquote lean or eating paleo or whatever. But once my son Parker was born, I got to experience that intuitive eating like from the very beginning, right? Like the cry for food and then the not cry after he's done eating. And then once he starts eating like solid foods, you can see him like wanting certain things and then not wanting certain things. And then, now that he's a toddler, it's just crazy to see how much of an intuitive eater he is because he hasn't, been bothered by, the diet culture yet. And it is inevitable and you gotta, work at it all the time. But like, I mean, we have everything in our house. We ask him if he wants to go out for ice cream. We ask him if he wants to go out to pizza. For right now, he's obsessed with like pepperoni, which is great. But that like it lasts like a week, and then he's obsessed with like chicken nuggets, or he's obsessed with like became obsessed with grapes the other week. Just like obsessed with grapes. All he would eat was grapes, and like just seeing that. I mean, this weekend we were up at our house upstate, and we were in the pool for like hours both days, and I noticed that like he didn't eat that much during those days because he was so excited to be around. He had other toddler friends there, all the kids from his class, and I was cooking food, and like there were hamburgers and hot dogs and like all this food available, but like he only had like a couple pieces of watermelon and then like maybe a slice of pizza or something, and like that was it. And it's been like a couple days now. We're back in the city, and like he's at school and stuff. I see him just like getting hungry again. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
you can eat less on certain days and then like naturally you want more the next day. Like that concept to me was would never think of that concept until I did the work with you and saw it within my son.
Yeah.
It's pretty nuts that you're born an intuitive eater and then you just become bombarded with so many different diet culture messages.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a cool element to have in the mix, right? Like not everyone I work with has a son who's like just been born and they're witnessing them, start
I'm
solids
very
and
thankful. Yeah,
it's like you
I'm
guys
very
had like a
thankful.
parallel intuitive eating journey in a way. Like you were relearning and he was just like experiencing it, sort of uncorrupted by diet culture.